All right. How's it going, George?
Yeah, all good. Thank you, Brian, for having me on. The first time you've hosted something of this nature on your
Y-
channel, right?
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah. I'm new to YouTube, so this is the first time for me.
awesome.
But so for everybody that doesn't know you, you want to just like briefly explain like what your channel's about and how you went vegan?
Yeah, sure. So I run the YouTube channel George Martin Carnism Debunked, and it's an activism, animal rights activism channel and channel about veganism. But I also do sort of commentary on the vegan movement itself, some certain socio-political commentary and stuff about goings on within the vegan movement. And I got into veganism about 11 years ago. I saw Gary Yourofsky's Best Speech You'll Ever Hear, and that completely changed my life. And so got looking into veganism from there and found out that I had no argument at all to oppress animals and made the switch.
Awesome. Awesome. So I see that you talk a lot about politics, tends to be a pretty prevalent topic on your channel. So where do you see yourself like politically?
Yeah, so, well, one thing I'll clarify for your listeners is when I do talk about politics, I actually try to make it in the context of animal rights somehow, or within the context of the animal rights movement. But politically, I would say I am a centrist or a particularist. I'm happy with either of those terms. So I don't consider myself left or right wing. I have some views that are left wing, some views that are right wing, or kind of like what you'd call anti woke, or some kind of whatever kind of term you want to say like that. So it's, yeah, for me, I'm selective about which issues I take a position on. I call a lot of people these days box tickers. It's that it seems to be the case that people are very divided into I'm this and I'm that, and I think it's actually much more rational to have the view about what you find is rational on each issue that there is, each topic.
Yeah, that makes sense totally. So what do you think it is like in the vegan movement that most vegans tend to be pretty left wing? Do you have like any kind of intuition as to why that is?
Yeah, I think, yeah. So, first of all, I would say that you're right in saying that most vegans are left wing. And I think firstly, I think that left wing spaces over the years have been the sort of more accommodating spaces to, pro animal views. Sort of, if you look, maybe over the past few decades. But I think maybe that's kind of, it could be changing a little bit now. I'm not sure, but I think both sides are pretty anti-animal rights. I mean, I think, I don't
Yep.
like it when left-wing vegans say that veganism is a left-wing movement, because 99% of leftists aren't vegan.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think just throughout the decades, maybe those left-wing spaces just have fostered that, just those tiny little microcosms more of pro-animal rights kind of views. And I think a lot of leftists are less likely to be religious. And I think religion has been a big factor in stopping people from going vegan, which I think is just ridiculous, because you can absolutely be vegan if you're Christian, if you're Muslim, whatever it is. Like
Yeah.
we want the movement to be welcome to people of all religions, but ultimately, we'd be lying if we're to be saying that people are not held back by religion. They absolutely are. It's a very common argument we get is, God gave us the permission to kill these animals. And I think left-wing people are less likely to have that. They do come up with some other bullshit though,
Yeah.
but that's one thing that they just don't say. And the other thing is, I think, and this is a problem within our own movement, I think the movement itself has been too outwardly anti-right wing, anti-accommodating to people with right wing views. When a movement that should have people of every single political view in it is saying stuff like, we're a left wing movement, or we won't stand at marches with people who voted Trump, or any of this crap. Well, what is a right wing person going to think when they see that? They're just going to associate vegan with leftism. So negative association from right wing people with with leftism. So I think it's important for me to decouple animal rights from leftism.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, like when you look at like anti-racism movements, you never see them really outright say like, oh, well, we can't have right-wing people here, right? Like right-wing people should be racist. But when it comes to veganism, there's some kind of disconnect there where they say, okay, you can't be vegan if you're not left-wing. So I just think that's really interesting that there's that kind of separation.
Right. Yeah, this is what I say about intersectionals. Animals always get the bum deal. And I just want to say what an intersectional is for someone in your audience who might not be aware. So someone who practices intersectional veganism, the way that they kind of spin it is that it's about solving all issues of injustice, or thinking that all issues of injustice are interlinked. Okay, great. That's what we all kind of think anyway, to a certain extent, right? The way that I would actually describe intersectionality is, it means the movement is as much about human rights as it is about animal rights, and B, it's a far left movement. Now, I agree with absolutely neither of these things. So intersectionals, in my mind, are very much are often, I'd say 90% of the time, 99% of the time, massively speciesist, and they do practice these things that you just mentioned there. Intersectionality only ever seems to go kind of one way. And you know, one example of that is they say that in order to be vegan, you have to be pro BLM, pro this, you have to be pro choice, you have to be pro immigration, you have to be pro gun control, whatever it is. But then they don't say to any of the people in those movements, in order to be part of BLM, you have to be vegan. Oh, in order to go on this pro-Palestine march with us, you have to be vegan, or any of that. So it only goes one way. They don't hold human rights activists to the same scrutiny that they do animal rights activists.
Yeah. Do you think there's some truth to adding human rights into veganism outside of like just intersectionality?
So here's the interesting thing. While I'm not intersectional, I absolutely agree that it can intersect with human rights in some ways, right? I mean, look at how rainforest destruction caused by animal agriculture is absolutely decimating the homes of indigenous people. Look at how slaughterhouses like exploit migrants on like false work visas and get them to do these horrific slaughterhouse jobs. Look at the way that slaughterhouse employment increases rates of rape and violent crime and murder in an area where a slaughterhouse is set up, because surprise, surprise, it's you know, it's as if slitting throats all day makes people a bit violent or tune off to violence. So it does intersect in some ways, but veganism isn't about those things, if that makes sense. And it's certainly not about other just totally irrelevant crap like, you know, police killing black people or something like that. That has literally nothing to do with the animal oppression. So
yeah. So where would you say, like, I guess we should define like veganism. Like, what would you define as veganism then?
So I would say veganism is the rejection of animal slavery. So a vegan is someone who rejects the idea that animals are resources and commodities here to serve humans. So we practice that via not only a vegan diet, so eating a plant-based diet, but we also don't wear clothing that comes from animals. We don't go to zoos that enslave animals. You know, you see, in circuses and stuff, you see these circuses where they've got, dancing elephants and stuff like that. Yeah. And it's like, how on earth did an elephant get in a position where that's not an elephant's natural behavior? So a vegan totally rejects all these things that commodify and enslave animals.
Oh, absolutely. So for myself, I would like define veganism as kind of like an extension of human rights to animals. Do you think that is like an accurate description, or do you think that that's like not accurate?
So I actually think that in a sense it's true. I don't know if it's the description we should essentially go with, because it might. The reason is, I know there's this whole kind of name the trait thing that's great, by the way. It's a very good philosophical tool for those kind of logically minded carnists who won't seem to change unless you present them with some kind of logical contradiction as to why they're enslaving animals.
Yeah.
So it is absolutely true that there is no trait true of animals that, if true of a human, would cause us to say it's okay to put humans in those positions that we do to animals, enslaving them for the circus or, slitting their throats for a burger. But even that definition might be a bit kind of too human centric, right? It's like, oh, humans are this special thing and we should respect animals because they're like us, right? It's an extension of our rights. And it's like, well, animals should have the rights regardless of whether it's an extension of human rights or not. So it is true, but I guess I would be careful about using that definition.
I think in the practical sense, it makes sense because where we're at as a society, people can like acknowledge what human rights are, and then they can look to apply them to animals. But I think in the future, I think you're right, where we would just ditch the term human and just say, it's a rights-based movement for all.
Yeah.
In that sense, when it comes to like intersectionality, would you agree with that humans partake in it to some degree if we had like a vegan movement in the future, to where it's like we're acknowledging like basic rights of all?
Yeah, it depends exactly what you mean, I guess. I'm very cautious to say about how this kind of human rights stuff would actually be implemented into the animal rights movement. There can be ways we can kind of carefully do it to get people on our side. But there are also ways that just kind of make humans the complete center focus. And I think that's where intersectionality is going very wrong. It's the only movement that we have. There's only one movement dedicated to animals, and that's the animal rights movement. And when intersectionals come in and just say, well, humans are animals too, and then they just make it about all of their political causes that they want to make it about, which is always from a very biased far left perspective, by the way. They don't care. For example, this is one of the things I always end up ranting about, but they seem to think that they have like a monopoly on what is oppression. So they say stuff like, oh, didn't you know veganism is an anti-oppression movement? Therefore, how can you be vegan if you're not against oppression? But then what are the things they consider oppression? Well, the things that they consider oppression are things that the right wing actually consider, a form of liberty, and the things that the left do is oppression. Look at abortion, for example. I mean, people on the right see the abortion industrial complex as like a hugely murderous and oppressive act of evil. They see the government seizing their guns as oppression. They see Islamic immigration as a hugely oppressive thing that will end up, harming gay people and women in the country in the long run. So there's not really there's no kind of politically neutral way you can really advance this. And that's a huge problem with making the animal rights movement about humans.
Yeah, I agree. I think like in order to do that, you have to walk like a thin line between where you're just disregarding the animals or you're actually including humans in it. So it is pretty tough. And I do agree with you, when a lot of people do claim to be intersectional, they put humans before. So they'll put any kind of human movement before, like you said. Like you can go to an anti-racist movement and not be vegan, and it's totally okay. But if it's the other way around or anything like that, then it becomes an issue. And I think people need to try to be more morally consistent. And I think there should be more like interjection of veganism into a lot of these other movements to try to make them more consistent.
Absolutely. Me and David Rams have banged on about this so many times, but we always say, right, like from the live streams and podcasts that we've done, one of the key points we've made so often is, even though we disagree with it and what they're doing to the animal rights movement, we wouldn't have so much of a bug up our ass about it if they just applied this to the other movements. It'd be like, look, if you're making veganism about BLM, whatever, it's like, oh, okay, for God's sake, like we're annoyed that you're doing this to the movement. But we wouldn't care as much, anywhere near as much. Like, we would at least think it was consistent if they were saying to BLM, you have to be vegan. If they were writing to Patrice Cullors saying, all that money that you received from what happened in 2020, the millions that you splashed on a mansion, will you donate that into the animal rights movement? Will you, BLM, start practicing consistent anti-oppression and intersectionality and actually start being vegan for the animals?
Why do you think there is that like disconnect between?
One word, speciesism.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the vast majority of intersectionals are speciesists, are human supremacists, and they simply, it's just not computing in their brain how this is speciesist, and that's why we call animals the world's forgotten victims. I
Yeah.
don't know how. I don't know how, like, I don't comprehend just how lacking in logic someone would have to be to hold these positions that so many intersectionals do and not actually understand that they're engaging in speciesism. Like, if this was me who would say I'd just gone vegan and this was a view I held, it was like, I think all vegans should be this, but then I'm not applying it to like this cause that I'm, that I'm advocating for in the human context. I would just immediately recognize that that was inconsistent and that, hold
Yeah.
on, wait, I'm holding vegans to a higher pedestal here, and I'm putting animals, I'm just, putting them on the back burner. But I don't know how they just don't compute that. It's always just really infuriated me, actually.
Yeah, I have an intuition that it's like people fall into veganism just because it's maybe something that people around them are doing, or maybe they realize like, oh well, it's a cruelty movement against like cruelty to animals, but they don't really see animals as moral equals. So maybe they don't see the disconnect between like being an anti-racist activist and not being vegan. So I think that's really part of the issue.
No, you're absolutely right. And this is one of my theories as well, is I think a lot of intersectionals, I think they fell into veganism just the ways of being consistently anti-oppressive. It's like, oh yes, we have to be against all injustices. Then they come
Mhm.
across an article one day online. Oh, what's this? Animals are oppressed as well. Oh yeah, well I guess I'll do this thing called veganism then, right, to be consistent. But they're not feeling it in their heart. They didn't come across that speech from Gary Yourofsky or Dominion or Earthlings or something and go,
Yeah.
wow, this has really impacted me, this has really hit me, I'm going to dedicate my life, my heart to animal rights. It was just this kind of thing they fell into to be consistent. And I think that's why you do see, I mean, you can smell it from a mile off with these people. You see that a lot of intersections just kind of drop out the movement eventually, and they go back to eating animals or oppressing animals in other ways. I've seen a fair few examples of this recently, a fair few like very, very toxic individuals from the animal rights movement. And obviously I want them to still be vegan. So I'm not going to say, thank God they're gone in that case. I think it
Yeah.
sucks that they're now abusing animals. But I mean, at least those fuckers aren't like destroying our movement anymore. They're outside the movement. So that's the silver lining.
Yeah, exactly. It's just sometimes though I feel like with certain people it's better that they maybe don't become vegan in the first place. It would be better not to bring them in because they do it for the wrong reasons and it kind of represents the movement in a wrong way. But it all depends on the individual.
Well, look, I think we shouldn't take that position in general. I think we'd obviously want every single person to be,
Yeah.
I wish Hitler was vegan,
Yeah.
we hear that thing, but
Yeah.
it's for PR reasons. Sure, there might be certain cases where we don't want the person to be the face of the animal rights movement.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess when I say vegan, I mean people that put on like this persona of being vegan, but they aren't actually. You know what I mean? Like people that wear it like a costume, where they're not
Mm.
actually like into it ethically, but they just put it out. Like you see this with a lot of celebrities and stuff, where they're like, "Oh, I'm vegan," and realistically, they're on a plant-based diet, and half of them go back to eating fish for health reasons. So I think with those type of people, they do more damage than they do good. But that's also because they didn't really do it for ethical reasons in the beginning.
Yeah, you see so many celebrities and stuff who just think that veganism is just this trend or some diet or something, and they don't feel it in their bones. They don't understand what animal rights is. They don't understand that veganism is an animal rights movement.
Mhm.
So you get so many celebrities just representing veganism in a very bad way, and that leads to all these, we hear this stupid stat all the time. 84% of vegans return to eating animals. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, 84% of people who say they were vegan return to eating animals because
Yeah.
they saw it as a diet. That's by nature what a diet is. You do something temporarily and then you go back. Well, if you actually examine the animal rights movement, a tiny percentage of people return to oppressing animals. It does happen. We've seen various cases of this recently, unfortunately, in our own spaces. We've been very, very disappointed by people who have taken part in radical actions to liberate animals. Look at, where's an Amy Omar, for example, in the UK? I'm name dropping now because I don't give a shit, but these two were the face of Meet the Victims in the UK. They used to storm into farms and lead liberations of pigs, and those two are now animal oppressors. I mean, it beggars belief, but generally the dropout rate in the actual animal rights movement is tiny, whereas in the plant-based diet movement, it's massive. Yeah, it's 8 out of 10 people.
Yeah, I think that's the problem where they confuse the two. It's mostly just plant-based dieters that end up falling off of it. But to go back to like the intersectionality stuff. So in the future, let's say we did have a vegan world, like where do you see intersectionality playing a role into that? Like us accounting for human rights in a vegan society, or?
Well, by that, if we had a vegan world, then there'd be no real such term anymore as vegan. And then these people would just literally be far left activists. So that would just be, that wouldn't be a case of intersectionality. That's just a bunch of far left people who, in a world of already vegan people, are vegan, and veganism is just the norm. If you're talking about the long struggle towards animal liberation, I don't see intersectionality as playing any good role at all. I just see it as keeping the movement back. These people are actively holding the movement back. They're actually trying to hold the movement back in most cases. I've seen a few intersectionals, I'm not going to tar them all with the same brush, who do want animal rights to advance and who want this movement to be as big as possible. But the vast majority of intersectionals, from what I've seen, they want animal rights to be as tiny as possible. They just want it to be people with their fringe political views. You can only be in the animal rights movement if you believe there's infinite genders. You can only be in the animal rights movement if you believe that, white men are oppressive scum. You can only be in the animal rights movement if you're pro-choice. The vast majority of the world thinks abortion is a horrendous crime, by the way. So that's they're just trying to if you were trying to make the animal rights movement as small as possible, that would be the thing I would do. If I wanted to sabotage animal rights, that is exactly what I would do. I would make it about all these issues that most people in the world think are a load of nonsense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when it comes to intersectionality, I don't completely agree with it, because I think there is certain aspects like you're talking about that are very problematic. But I tend to like to refer to it as moral consistency, where there's a certain baseline that we give to humans that we would grant to animals, like we were saying before. But I think when it comes to intersectionality, people expand that way beyond that moral baseline, and they're saying things like, well, there's class differences and we need wealth equality and stuff like that. And I think that's going way beyond somebody's basic human rights. So I think there is a certain level to where we should include rights into it, and then kind of push out some of this other stuff. That's why I try to get away from the term intersectionality. But I definitely understand your disagreements with it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, as I say, I think there are certain ways in which we can, we can maybe appeal to people with some of the human stuff. But ultimately, if you just make veganism about the human stuff, it's not going to go very far at all. They think, and it's the opposite of what they're saying. They think by making it about these human socio-political issues that it's going to expand. They always say things to us like non-intersectional vegans. How can you expect so-and-so to take, they'll say this, for example, how can you expect black people to feel welcome in our movement if we've got vegans who don't stand for Black Lives Matter? And I would just respond by saying, how can you expect black people to feel welcome in the movement if you think veganism is about being pro-choice on the abortion issue? Go to Africa and start talking about how women should be able to terminate their pregnancies. They'll look at you like you're an alien. Africa is deeply religious, Christian and Muslim. If you start going there talking about how women have the right to an abortion, they would think that you were there just to spread evil. Frankly, that's what they'll think of someone doing that there. So how are we going to make animal rights appealing to everyone if we make it about these kind of left-wing positions?
Yeah, I had a run with somebody on my TikTok that was basically saying that I didn't really have a stance on the Israel-Palestine conflict, and they were upset with me for not putting my thoughts forward. So I definitely see stuff like that in like the intersectionality movement, where if you don't have a specific opinion on something, people are looking to cancel you for it. Even if it's not having like the quote unquote like right opinion, it's just like not taking a stance. They consider that as like the wrong opinion.
Yeah, 100%. That's one of the most cancerous things they've constantly told us over the years is if you're neutral about a situation, you take the side of the oppressor. Well, number one, how do you know which side the oppressor is? You're talking about these highly contentious political issues where both sides think that there's an oppressor on the other side. Let's take the Israel-Palestine stuff, for example. You know, how would someone who's not educated about the issue there know who the oppressor is? Is it Israel or is it Hamas and Iran and the regimes that the pro-Israel side want to wipe out Israelis and Israel, right? So they try to kind of bully and pressure and gaslight people into utilizing ultimately the Dunning-Kruger effect. Are you aware of what the Dunning-Kruger effect is?
No, I'm not actually.
So it's a term in psychology where the less you know on an issue, the more confident you seem to assert your opinions on it. So they kind of try to actually usher people into practicing the Dunning-Kruger effect and just taking these very, very hardline stances on issues that they have no clue about, no real education about, but just by the few things they've told them. Oh, there's a genocide going on in Gaza. You have to take this position. Now, if you don't take the position, if you're just like, hey, I need to learn a little bit more about it. No, that means you are a genocider. You are taking the side now of the genocider because you're just saying, I don't know enough about it. Or you're saying, this isn't really my fight, my interest at the moment while I focus on animal rights. So they're very clever in how they kind of get people to take these positions. And that's why we've seen over the years, the far left, the woke kind of grow within society because they're very good at domineering people and gaslighting them into taking up their positions through, who would want to be a genocider? Who would want to be a Nazi or any of these awful things, right? So people feel kind of pressured and bullied into taking those positions. And that's how these movements kind of spread.
Yeah, I think that's the part of the issue is people, when they see a certain subject, they don't try to look at it from different angles. They look at it from like, what's the most popular angle? So that's how they analyze something. Like for myself, I grew up in like a hunting family, very pro-carnist family. So for me, I had to look at veganism from like a different perspective and be like, why do people think this way? And that's what kind of got me into it. But I think other people with other types of thought processes, they don't do that behind anything. They're just thinking like, oh, well, if you support Israel, you're just a terrible person to begin with.
Right.
So it's like they're not really there. Or if you're pro-life, you're a terrible person. You just want to oppress women. Like they're not looking at it from a different angle to be like, well, why do people believe this? And then like, where are they starting from?
You're 100% right. And I'm reading, or should I say listening, because I've got the audio book, but I'm listening to this great book at the moment called The Parasitic Mind by Gad Saad. And he talks in it about how unpopular ideas, if you have some kind of opinion that kind of goes against the norm in any sort of modern society, that just seems to be like punished rather than, the way it should be is if you take a position that's different from the norm, we should look at that with interest. We should be like, oh, why have you come to that, realization? And, oh, what's this guy onto? Maybe he knows something. Like a scientific discovery, right? If someone says that they've, seen a new comment or something, we don't shame them for that. Let's see what this guy's just seen. Let's take a look through his telescope, right? But what Gad Saad is kind of saying in this book is, you take the popular opinion, you just go with the mob mentality. You're kind of rewarded. That's this good thing. Oh, well done. You stand for BLM. Oh, good. You stand with Palestine. You're a good, you're one of us and you'll be rewarded. But if you dare have any kind of opinion, even if it's totally altruistic, that goes against that and say, well, actually, I think it's worse to do this because this will oppress and harm more people this way, because actually the truth is this, They just want to shut you down instantly, and you are now some kind of heretic. You're some kind of blasphemer. And how dare you have some kind of position that in any way goes against what the mob wants?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's weird to me with veganism because you have to start from a position where it's like you're trying to understand why somebody eats animals, right? Because you're trying to say, like, well, what are the reasons that somebody believes this? And a lot of vegans will say, like, well, they were raised for it. They have a lot of reasons why somebody would do it. But then when it comes to something like somebody voting for Donald Trump, they're like, oh, they're just a bad person. That's the reason why they do it. So I wonder if that also is from speciesism, or maybe it's from the fact that people themselves, a lot of vegans themselves ate animals at one point. So they're sympathetic for that reason. I don't like, what are your take on towards that?
Yeah. I don't think that they can use that argument as, oh, well, I used to be non-vegan myself, because they also say that they grew up in a racist society. Remember, these people say every white person is racist. Okay, this is actually their position. They say every single white person is racist because they live in a society that is built for white people, and they use that system or something like that. Their argument is terrible. But so then by their own logic, any white intersectional would just say, well, I used to be racist and I understand racism. I was conditioned into racism myself. Therefore, I hang around with racists. And, I see I go out. I went for a drink last night with a racist and we had a good chat. No, they don't do that at all. It's like, if you have any difference of opinion about this, you tick the wrong box on ballot day, you are evil, you are scum. If you're non-vegan, though, if you oppress animals, hey, I understand you. I used to be one of you. It's cool. I'll march with you.
Yeah. It's just insane to me because it's, you're looking at one person, let's say they have a different political opinion, there's no real direct rights violation, but you have somebody that's eating animals. It's like, there's a direct rights violation. So to me, I mean, it seems like one's way worse than the other, but to a lot of the intersectional people, it seems like, well, it's the reverse,
Yeah, and all these people do. Now, they might counter what you said there, Brian. They might say something like, but you see, Brian, they tick that box at the ballot station and that causes so-and-so to be oppressed. Okay, so once every 4 years, they tick a box that does something that you don't like. And let's say, hypothetically, you're right, and this box that they've ticked on ballot day actually has caused this bad thing to happen. Okay, they do that once every 4 years. These people vote. Non-vegans vote. They put a tick in a box 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. When they go into that supermarket, they cast their vote 3 times a day to oppress animals right there and then in that instant. Times that, do the calculations of that every single day for 4 years. That's a completely different ratio of causing harm via your own actions.
Exactly. And you're directly buying the dead body of a victim too, versus like you could even vote for a certain political candidate and not agree with all of their stances too. Like you can completely disagree with some of them too. Just to say that like you're doing it intentionally to oppress somebody and then that's worse than like, eating animals. I just disagree,
Yeah, absolutely. And there was a point you brought up a moment ago as well about, these people just instantly assume someone is a bad person if they have this position on this. Studies actually show that the reason we believe the things we believe, in the vast majority of cases, is just because we believe that's the ethical position to hold. So if someone supports Israel, it's not because they're a genocider and they want to wipe out the Palestinians or whatever it is. If someone supports Israel, the case is that they think Israel is ultimately the good guy in this and that Israelis are at threat and they're trying to defend themselves from a group of people who want to wipe them out. I don't know whether they're right on that. I don't know whether they're wrong. I'm not super, I don't think anyone is actually particularly well informed about this conflict. It's been going on since our grandparents' time, and not every single person knows. If someone says, I know everything about this conflict, by the way, ultimately discard their opinion. They're lying.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the reason we come to the positions we do is because we just believe that that's the altruistic position to take. A pro-lifer has no interest in controlling women's bodies. Who wants to do that? That's just like the weirdest take ever. Someone is pro-life because they are genuinely concerned with babies being killed in the womb. They just see that as a horrifically evil act. So they can't keep. There are people in the world who do hold evil positions, and it's because they genuinely are hateful and evil. There might be someone who just says, I think we should just machine gun all people who are of a certain race. Oh, why do you believe that? Oh, because I just hate them, whatever. Those people are just idiots, right? There are evil, hateful people in the world. But for the most part, when you hear a position that doesn't align with yours, it's just because the person has come to a different conclusion from you based on the facts that they've heard. They've heard a different side of the story to you in most cases, and they've come to a conclusion based on that.
Yeah, or they even as simply as they have like a different upbringing too, right? So maybe they were exposed to different things than you were. So they have a different side of the story as to maybe if you were pro-choice, you were exposed to a certain side of, facts and things. And I think a lot of it comes to people being in bubbles still, and that they just constantly are in these echo chambers where they're hearing these same ideas over and over again, where it's like, okay, well, you don't you believe in women's rights if you're not pro-choice. It's like if people just repeat that over and over again, then it becomes like that's the talking point that they have, and they're not willing to accept anything against that.
You're right, and that's how what's called the big lie technique works. When you just repeat a lie so many times, it starts becoming believed. So these are just lies that they spread within their echo chambers, their circles, and because people just repeat these buzzwords, these phrases, these buzz terms so many times, that just kind of gets accepted as the truth, like an objective truth, and you're not really allowed to go against that. So these people just see it as like this. I think some of them see it as this objective truth in many cases that, if you take this position, that means you are a this. However, I also think with a lot of them, it's a case of what's called shooting the messenger, right? I think if someone has a position that gives you some cognitive dissonance in any sense. For example, let's say someone was pro-choice, but a pro-lifer came up with maybe a good argument that made them feel a bit uncomfortable, made them feel that cognitive dissonance in their belly. It was like, oh, damn, he's come up with a good point there. They might do what's called just shooting the messenger. They might just say, you just want to control women. Because that's a way to ease their cognitive dissonance. It's a way to actually say you're assigning bad intent to an altruistic thing to someone who's perhaps beat you in a debate on something. And we see many people on the left engage in this. I'm sure people on the right engage in it as well. I've seen it more so on the left, though.
I think it's a common thing in debates just to straw man the opponent just to make it easier. So, if you're going to say, well, you just don't agree with women's rights, then that makes it easy to defend that position against you versus actually attack what you believe. And we see that a lot too in veganism, right? Where people are like, oh, crop death. So, and, they throw a lot of these things out where it's like, well, you can't be vegan because you kill animals, in your diet. So it's certain things like that where they don't understand what the actual value is. And they're just drawing conclusions from this straw man that they have.
Yeah, exactly. It's a real problem that people don't want to actually tackle the objective facts of a debate. They don't want to actually discuss the issue and have a frank serious discussion about the issue. What people like to do in debates, they just like to, they just like to focus on the person who's presenting the debate. They want to find something about him. In what way can I expose this person as a hypocrite? In what way can I assign bad intentions to this person? Because that just makes it easier for them to, win the argument in their head.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You even see this in with veganism too, when you have big platforms like Piers Morgan bringing people on. It's like he'll cut them off right before anybody ever brings up anything that's actually fact based, or he'll just go into avocados or something like that, just because they try to straw man the argument towards something that's just completely irrelevant.
Yeah, Piers is one of the worst offenders for that, and you see. This is becoming a big problem in kind of mainstream media journalism. Piers will kind of say, I'm sure, that he's, against the mainstream media in some sort of way, and he's anti-status quo, but he's not. He's there on those channels to, I think, defend corporate interests. Like, have you noticed that all these TV presenters have the exact same view on veganism? They never have They never have like a big ag boss on the show and they're grilling them about, why is this happening in the pork industry? Why are you doing this to mother cows and their calves? It's always about protecting those big corporations. And it's, they do this with other, environmental movements and stuff as well. It's not just related to animals that they do this. They'll have like Just Stop Oil on the show, or Extinction Rebellion, or whoever on these UK shows. And it's always like, how dare you disrupt the lives of ordinary people doing your protests, in the road and stuff. And I get it. Those protests are disruptive and annoying as hell. If I was on the way somewhere and those people were just lying in the middle of the motorway, yeah, okay, I would be pissed off. But why do those TV presenters never have the actual bosses of those corporations on the show and grill them about anything? Why are you still using this type of fuel? Why are you still doing this? They never do. It's all about corporate interests. So all those presenters conveniently just have the same opinion about every little thing.
Do you think that's because of the money involved? Do you think that's the reason why they do that? They don't actually like create good discussions is for that reason?
I do. I think these shows are probably sponsored by a lot of these corporations. I would not be surprised in the slightest, if Talk TV or GB News, I would not be surprised in the slightest if they had sponsors in, the beef industry, the oil industry was, paying them, and, whether it's for advertising or to push a certain message. I think it's about protecting the interest of these corporations. Otherwise, why do they all have the exact same views? How come there's none of these TV talk shows on mainstream TV presented by an animal rights activist? Why is there never an animal rights activist sitting there on their desk with the city skyline in the background, whatever, and there's hey, you're coming on because you say that it's okay to oppress animals. Tell me why you think that. No, it's always the other way around.
Yeah. And I noticed here in the US, like it's even more rare to see that on TV. And when they do it, like Fox News, a lot of time will bring somebody in and they'll just make a total joke out of it. And they'll intentionally pick somebody that has like absolutely crazy ideas. Like if they do bring somebody that's vegan on, it's like, oh, well, is it ethical to own a pet or something? Like, it's just like it really obscure like things that people have crazy ideas on, and they'll just grill them on that versus like trying to find out the truth of like, okay, what does it actually mean to be a vegan?
Yes, God help Fox News, for example, if they actually had to show footage of what happened in the beef or the dairy industry. No, they can't do that. They're just going to get on this kind of wacko vegan who was doing something weird in the street once, and they're just going to say, they're going to go with the lowest common denominator. They're just going to choose like the lowest sentient animal or something to talk about. It's like, hey, do you guys eat oysters or something like that? And then they're just going to go with that message.
Yeah, absolutely. And back to the intersectionality thing too, something that I thought was pretty interesting. By me, there was a sanctuary where there was a cow that that escaped from a slaughterhouse, and the sanctuary actually took the cow and they did a TV interview on it, and it was actually on Fox News. And I believe it was Tucker Carlson that actually did the segment on it. And they released that segment onto the Instagram page of that sanctuary. And you should have seen the comments on it. Was all people like, how dare you have be on Fox News? And there was all sorts of things like this on there where it's like, it blew my mind, because it's like, it was actually a legitimate piece on veganism that was being put out there on mainstream television. And they were more focused on the fact that it was on Fox News rather than like vegans were out there getting their name out there.
Yeah, that is so counterproductive. Like the one time Fox News perhaps does something right and they actually just look at veganism from a kind of balanced perspective rather than ridiculing it, and then you have so-called vegans in the comments section just saying, why did you appear on Fox News? I mean, this reminds me so much of what me and Connor Anderson discussed on my recent podcast. I did I think it's the latest episode of the Carnism Debunked podcast. It's called Has the Left Lost the Art of Debate? Apparently in the run-up to the last election, so Trump went on Joe Rogan's show, right?
Yeah. Yep.
But Kamala didn't, and one of the key reasons was she had dissenting voices from progressives within her own party saying, we wouldn't like it if you went on this guy's show, just but like guilt by association. This guy, oh my God, Brian, you're going on a show with someone who has different viewpoints from you. You can't
Exactly.
do that. As a politician, as if you're meant to actually sit there and actually deal with scrutiny and stand up to the arguments that he puts forward to you. No, you can't do that. You must stay in your little echo chamber. And
Yeah.
so this is like the same kind of stupid behavior that some of these vegans who are also on that side of the political spectrum are engaging in. And that's such a problem with far left politics now. It's not about having discussions. It's not about sitting down with someone who has a different viewpoint from you. It's all about echo chambers.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, I mean, you spend all this time painting people as like Nazis, and then you're like, oh, well, I would never speak with them. I'd never sit at a table with them. Meanwhile, the other party is saying, like, yeah, let's sit down and have a discussion. So you have a lot of people that maybe are undecided in the middle saying, like, well, let me listen to both of them, see which one, would make more sense. And obviously, they only get one choice to listen to somebody like Donald Trump. And then maybe they're thinking, well, he makes a lot of sense in this. So I think that's part of the reason why Democrats are losing right now, because they're not exiting their bubble to try to bring people in. They're just saying, like, okay, anybody outside of this is a threat to us, and we're not going to engage with them.
Exactly. I mean, if I was president elect of the United States, or I don't know what the term is for, where presidential candidate for the United States, and I was running for the Democrat Party, if I was in Kamala's position, basically, going on the Joe Rogan podcast is like the first thing I'd do, especially if I just heard Trump went on it, right? It's like, it's the world's most listened to podcast. I don't care that, Joe Rogan is going to be scrutinizing me and is going to be grilling me. I want to go on the show and I want to stand up to those criticisms live on air. I want to convert those people who would otherwise be voting for Trump. I want them to vote for me, right? So I'm going to be going on a show like that with someone who I don't agree with an audience who largely disagrees with me, and I'm going to win them over. I'm going to try to win the electorate.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that they thought that was a bad idea to try to actually win over a group of people who are otherwise going to vote for the guy you don't want to win the election. I mean, it's as if they don't understand what the point of an election is. Did they think in the build up to the election they're just going to be preaching? Be quiet. They're just going to be preaching to the choir. No, the idea of the run up is you try to convince those people who are going to be voting for the other side.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's interesting with Joe Rogan too, because like most of his audience is like young white men, so that would have been a perfect opportunity for her to get out there and get some recognition from a group that she's not really targeting that often. Yeah, so I think the issue now with politics is like certain people aren't looking to expand outside of that bubble, and like you said, to bring it back to veganism, that's like the core issue we're facing now too, is where you have to hold these very strict set of views, otherwise we're just gonna throw you out of the movement essentially.
Yeah, 100%. And just relating it to veganism, what we need to be doing more as vegans, I mean, it's all well and good you and I having this chat now. What we more importantly need to be doing is going on the podcasts of non-vegans, and preaching the vegan message there, because that is what is going to be most effective.
I agree, absolutely. And to bring it back to like the whole Joe Rogan thing, like obviously Joe Rogan's very popular with like young white men. And if you look at the vegan movement, like young white men are probably like the minority in the vegan movement too. Especially like straight white men, I would say, would be the minority. So like, what do you think is like a way that we could expand this out a little bit and say like, okay, maybe we'll bring these people that aren't necessarily like left wing, or they don't really believe in like a lot of these like ultra progressive views. Like, do you have like any kind of idea how to bring more of those people into this movement?
Yeah, I've discussed this a little bit recently. We need to kind of make the animal rights movement more appealing to like the lad, or what you guys in the States will call the bro, right?
Yeah.
There is kind of very much this kind of anti-lad or anti-bro environment within vegan spaces, because, there's the idea that, saying, dark jokes are like wrong. You can't use these words, or, if you, Lord have mercy on you if you have dark humor or something, and you tell like an inappropriate joke or something, or we see a lot of rhetoric within our spaces about hashtag yes all men and this stuff like that, and it seems like a kind of unfriendly environment to the kind of the lad or the bro, and it seems to be about all these quite sort of making the vegan movement about things that doesn't really appeal to that sort of that sort of crowd. I think ultimately we need to just remove our spaces from intersectionality in order to make it more appealing to that crowd. And we also need to really push back on the idea that veganism is just this kind of like anti-masculine, quote unquote, soy boy kind of movement. A right winger will just be like, you guys are just a bunch of like beta male soy boys. And then one of these intersexuals will just be like, yes, we are. And
Yeah,
like,
I know.
we need to make the movement like appealing to like the bros, the lads, whatever. So we need to just remove that kind of hyper feminized like mentality from the movement. It's good that, you know, veganism should be a space for both masculine energy and feminine energy. It needs to be a home for both of those things, but it can't be just about this kind of like ultra low testosterone rhetoric that we're seeing from.
Yeah, so I definitely agree with you. And I think if you look at something like the carnivore crowd, I think they're doing a really good job actually appealing at like young white men that are trying to, you know, get healthy with fitness and different things along those lines. And I see a lot of stuff where you see like, you know, Paul Saladino next to like a vegan activist that's real skinny, and they're saying, oh, look at this beta male versus this alpha male over here and stuff like that. So I think there's a certain degree in veganism, like where we should be like, yeah, you know, you could be a strong guy being vegan, you know, you can be like hyper masculine, you know, you can be all these traits. I think too, to like what you were saying is like I think there is a certain issue with people saying like, you know, well, it's toxic masculine to, you know, lift weights or, you know, to be into any of these things. I think we just sort of have that conflict between where like people are saying, okay, well, you know, I can't be, you know, in the gym and be vegan, so I might as well go be carnivore.
Yeah, it's like they've managed to tap into that market very well, haven't they? The whole carnivore diet crowd, which I think is funded by Big Beef, by the way.
Yeah, it is definitely.
They very much managed to kind of tap into that like insecurity in masculinity, which who want to feel assured that they actually are masculine. So they gravitate towards these things because they're insecure in their masculinity as it stands. And I don't want to be, you know, seedy like the way the carnivore diet crowd is in actually kind of preying on those people in that way and making it about that, because veganism is about the animals. It's not about, you know, being are you an insecure young man? We're going to prey on you and say you have to eat this to be masculine. But at the same time, we should advocate the idea that masculine values are welcome in the vegan movement, and that protecting animals is a really masculine quality. You're standing up for the innocent and defenseless against the powerful, against the system. That's a deeply masculine quality.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily something where we have to say like, okay, you have to have these qualities, you can't have these qualities, but it just has to be inclusive to people that do, you know, do have those, that are like hyper masculine, that want to, you know, work out and do all these things. I think we should say like, yeah, you can be vegan and be associated with this. And I think more and more you are seeing this. I saw that you had a discussion with Empty Cages recently. He's a friend of mine as well, and I think he does a good job as that, you know, doing that as well between his lifting and, you know, his jujitsu and stuff like that. So I think there's certain people like myself and him and others that are trying to kind of like fill that niche a little bit. But I definitely think there's a lot of work to be done with that.
Yeah. Hunter and I get on very well, and it was good to have him on a live stream recently. And yeah, he's also very good at debunking that absolute crap. You know, just look at him and the stuff that he's lifting and stuff. You know, the dude's a power. Are you a power lifter also?
I do like a hybrid between powerlifting and bodybuilding.
Yeah, so there's many examples out there. So guys such as yourselves who can move big old heavy objects in the gym, and I don't know why, but we're just being massively ignored by society in this regard. And I think a lot of it is intentional. You see people say just clearly untrue stuff like, I've never met a healthy vegan in my life. And that's just clearly a lie. But for those people who are genuinely deluded enough to actually believe that, we need to be doing a bit better, I guess, to kind of showcase that and push back against this idea that intersectionals really aren't helping with that. You know, vegans are just these kind of feminized soy boy beta male kind of types.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I definitely think there's more we can do to reach out to them. But I mean, that goes for any different types of people too. Like you were saying before, like religious people as well. I think there's a certain aspect where we can reach out to them as well. Do you think with like religious people, it's a better way to go to more so like debate religion, or do you think it's better to go like the Christspiracy type way, where it's like, oh well, you can be a Christian and be vegan?
That is a really good question, and that's something that I've talked about recently with quite a few people. So personally, I am an atheist. So if we are talking about atheism as a good baseline for being vegan, I would agree with that because it removes an obstruction essentially from that's in the way of them people getting to connect with animals. However, I do have to acknowledge that the vast majority of people just aren't going to share my viewpoint on religion, and we're not going to see eye to eye on that. So if I can find a way through their religion to actually communicate with them that animal oppression is wrong from a belief system that they're never ever going to ditch in their life, look, these people are going to be Christians, Muslim, whatever for the rest of their lives in most cases. I want to use every tool we can at our disposal to get them to connect with animals. And if it has to be through religion that we do that, great, I'll do that. And so I'm sharing Christspiracy all over the place at the moment. It's all over my social media, as you've probably seen. So, yeah. And I think it was a fantastic documentary, by the way. I just want to say to anyone who hasn't seen it, go check it out now, Christspiracy.com. And it'll appeal to you regardless of what your religious beliefs are. It's so cleverly done. It not only is such a documentary with a huge amount of wow factor that could convert a lot of Christians if they were to see it, but even if you're an atheist, if I saw that movie while I was not vegan as an atheist, I think that would turn me vegan just because it's good enough even without the actual religious message in it. So it's a fantastic documentary in many senses.
Yeah, I think it's good because it talks about just like general morality. So even if you're looking at it from like an atheist perspective, it's kind of like, okay, well, people that are religious like this, they hold these sort of values. So it does make sense to where like people don't have a lot of the interviews and stuff. They didn't really have any kind of explanation, for like how to ethically kill an animal. So it makes you think like, okay, well, if I hold these views, like why wouldn't I be vegan too?
Yeah, it's very good at exposing those double standards that we have as humans. No one wants to be an animal abuser. No one likes to think of the idea that they hurt animals or they're responsible for so much animal suffering. But most people just aren't living in line with those principles. And Christians, yeah, it's like they don't like the idea of Jesus slitting a lamb's throat. That idea actually to them, it sends shivers down their spine when they actually think of that idea. Imagine that painting that we have of Jesus holding the lamb, protecting that little lamb. That's how they see Jesus. Yet they're not living in alignment with that. So I think the documentary was very good at kind of playing, really honing in on the double standards we have as a society, whether we're Christian or not, or non-Christian, and actually make people realize, hang on, I'm not living in alignment with my actual morals. My morals say this, but my actions say another thing.
Yeah, it's interesting how many debates I've had with religious people, and I'll tell them like, okay, well, let's say Jesus is here today. He has a lamb on one side, or he has like a vegan burger on the other side. Like, what do you think he would eat? And a lot of times it does stop people, and they think about it like, it does make sense that he would choose the vegan option, but you do often hear people say, well, he would kill the lamb in the most ethical way possible too, as well. So I think there's a lot of work still to be done with religion, because I think there's a lot of like problematic views that it has to begin with right now. But I think that documentary did a good job of kind of like bridging the gap between people that are curious and religious to think about it.
It did. And it even suffered, assuming that, the documentary's claims are truthful. I say truthful. I don't believe in the God story, as it were, but assuming that it was truthful, at least about a man called Jesus who lived at the time and was advocating against animal oppression. Assuming that part at least is truthful, that warmed me towards Christianity as an atheist, even through a secular lens. It makes me appreciate the Bible at least as like a historical document, at least, even though there'll be many things in it that I wouldn't agree with. It would at least make me interested in learning about the life of Jesus, this man at the time who had these views. So it was very good as well for even warming atheists, even from a secular standpoint, just towards being interested in the history of Christianity and the Bible, because I'd never taken a real interest before.
Yeah, same as well, because I always thought there was a lot of like contradictions in the Bible as well. So looking at it from the way that they presented it, for me also, it was the same effect where it was like, this kind of makes sense, and like I'm more open to maybe discussing it more, because now that kind of gets rid of that contradiction of like, okay, well, we could, it's wrong to harm humans for any reason, but like it's totally okay to harm like an animal just for taste pleasure.
Absolutely. And the other thing that it does so well is it arms you with the arguments that you can use against Christians who say all this kind of stuff to you in arguments. God put animals here for us to eat, and Jesus ate fish and all this kind of stuff. It's very good for actually arming you with those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you're going to use it from like a biblical perspective, like actually go through the text, it is good to have like those different interpretations to be like, okay, well, was he actually talking about fishing, or what did dominion actually mean? It is good for that kind of perspective where it could open people's minds up to different points like that.
Yeah, it's a really fantastic documentary, and I think it just hits so many of the right spots. So I really urge everyone listening now to go check it out after the podcast.
Absolutely. So let's say hypothetically, to switch this up a little bit, let's say hypothetically you were in charge of like a big vegan movement, right? Let's say that there was a march coming up, you had to have like a ton of people come into it. Where would be the point for you as like a non-intersectional where you would say like, okay, I'm not going to allow this person to march with us, but like I'm going to allow like all these other people to march with us? Would there be like a certain cutoff, or would you say like anyone is welcome, or like how would you go like approaching that?
There would absolutely be a cutoff. If someone is an actual danger to other activists there, they shouldn't be welcome in those spaces. If someone has espoused political views that are just very directly a threat to others. For example, if someone is a Nazi and just says, I want like to kill all the Jews or something like that, I wouldn't want them there, because I want Jewish activists to feel welcome there and to be safe and protected there.
Absolutely.
But if someone just has pretty hardline views one way or the other, whether they're pretty hard right or hard left, and they've said some pretty kind of radical, distasteful stuff, I'd still have them there, because like we're not there to be friends or anything. We're there to just make some noise and be a big number in the street and march for the animals. I think it's just when people have said something that are a direct threat to other activists, or we know that this person is a danger to others, that I wouldn't want them in our spaces. So I'd handle it that way.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And that's kind of why I use the term like moral consistency, where it's like, okay, I would want to have somebody in that's not a direct threat to somebody else. But as far as it comes to like politics, I think we should try to remain as neutral as possible when it comes to these marches, because it's like, whether you come in, let's say you are like super right or super left, like I think you should leave your politics basically at the door before you join these marches, because I think that will get in the way of just fighting for animal rights. And I think I would extend this out to any movement too. If we had an anti-racism march, I would say I don't really care if you're a super right wing and you want to join in, or super left wing and you want to join in, but leave everything else, wealth inequality and all this other stuff, away, and let's talk about the core issue and like the victims, and keep them in mind.
Exactly. Hell, if I was to go on a human rights march and I'm a vegan, I wouldn't ask that people on the march are vegan. I'm there for that issue, right? Like, so for me, this is why it's such a huge contradiction when thif intersectionals decry the term all lives matter. These people are all lives mattering the animal rights movement. They say, if someone says all lives matter in response to a BLM march, they say, no, all lives mattering the movement that's about police brutality, about black people, that is wrong. And then you say to them, veganism is only about the animals. And then they say, but all lives matter. They need to be included. Every single group needs to be included in our animal rights advocacy. So they're doing the exact kind of thing they say not to do.
Yeah, I would probably actually approach it from more in like the opposite direction, where like I think if I was going to like an anti-racist march or something like that, I would say like try to bring veganism in as much as possible, like you were saying before, because I think there is a lot of intersects between those, and I think it is good to just if just somebody's out there marching for like an anti-oppressive movement, it's good to talk about veganism because I think they might be more open to it. So, do you think like maybe that should be the approach? Do you think, or you think we should just separate them?
That's a good question. I would keep them separate, but
Mhm.
at the same time, I think we can have the conversation with those people, just as we would with anyone. So, for example, on both sides of the abortion debate, we could talk to those people and we can try to work with their values, with the values that they have. But whether you're pro-life or whether you're pro-choice, I don't think it would make sense to go to one of those marches and make it about animal rights, because if the issue you're there is about abortion, that's what you're meant to be there marching for. And I'd apply that for the same in the animal rights movement, right? If you're on an animal rights march, you don't want to be making it about abortion.
Yeah.
But we should be having the conversation with people, whatever their values are, about how veganism aligns with the values that they already have.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I don't think we should go there and hold a sign. If we're at an anti-racist march, we shouldn't be holding a sign to say go vegan or whatever. Like I agree with you on that perspective, but I think like we should try to get in some of these circles and like start having the conversation, like you're saying, where like, listen, you hold these views already. Why wouldn't you also hold these views to animals?
Yes.
So I think that's an important thing to do. And I think if somebody wanted to do that in the vegan movement as well and say like, listen, you guys are all vegan, like you don't hold the XYZ human rights issue, like we should talk about that too. But I agree with you too, like you shouldn't be bringing human rights you know uh different kinds of science and things like that and bring them into the vegan movement. But I think if you were to talk about it with vegan activists, I think that's an important thing to do. And I think a lot of vegan activists would be open to hearing this kind of stuff because their minds are already open to like change and questioning their own beliefs. So I think both ways could be a good opportunity to get these messages out.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we should just utilize whatever method we can really to get people on board. So,
Yeah, absolutely. But with that, I guess George, you have any other questions for me or?
yeah, tell more people about your channel and stuff, because I think you're a fairly new YouTube channel, right?
Yeah, I not really too big on YouTube. I mostly do TikTok stuff. I'm trying to branch out more into YouTube. I want to do kind of longer form discussions like this because I think this is what we're missing in the vegan community is just like open dialogue. Maybe even start to get some carnists on here and kind of not necessarily a debate, but more of a discussion on why they hold their views and try to challenge them a little bit. But right now, I'm mostly on TikTok, and I do a lot of philosophy stuff, but I also do a lot of lifting videos and different kind of fitness stuff like that to try to engage that sort of crowd.
Yeah, and then I guess my other question for you would be, what do you recommend dietary wise for vegans who want to get big and strong? Like, what's the sort of what sort of stuff should vegans be eating if they want to be lifting them weights?
I think like when it comes to diet, people think of it like it's some kind of science. I mean, you've seen this just with veganism in general. They think you have to put a lab coat on and start mixing chemicals in order to make a meal. But even with like fitness in veganism too, it's just a matter of eating like a slight excess of calories too if you're trying to build muscle. So you do want to focus protein, like you want to make sure you're eating a lot of things like tofu, beans, seitan, different stuff like that. Eat a lot of whole foods. Try to avoid eating a lot of processed foods as much as possible. Get a good high quality vegan protein to take. It's really that simple, and it's just really your effort in the gym and then just making sure that your diet's clean and you're eating in excess calories and you'll gain muscle.
Yeah, awesome advice. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
while I don't think veganism is about health, or
Mhm.
I do think it's great optics for the movement that there are many vegans who can be fit and strong and can outlift so many non-vegans, because currently the
Yeah.
myths all go against us in that regard.
Yeah, well, people ask me that too. They say, like, let's say hypothetically, if you went vegan, like, you wouldn't be able to gain as much muscle or stuff. I would say, yeah, I would still do it. Like, it's my morals aren't dependent on like one of my hobbies, but it's
Yeah.
nice that the fact that like one of my hobbies works very well with veganism. I mean, I made most of my strength gains while I was vegan, so I think that it's awesome that you don't have to make that choice. Like, you can live the lifestyle you want to live and also make like an ethical choice.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I think that's very noble of you to say as well, because so many guys would rather. I mean, it's a myth. Obviously, we know that veganism doesn't harm your gains or whatever. But even if it did, yeah, like holy shit, like this is
Yeah.
trillions of animals' lives at risk every year. And you know, your gains should not be at their expense.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, I mean, nobody would choose to oppress a human if, you know, you gained muscle. So why would we choose to oppress animals for that? But luckily, we don't have to make that choice.
It's so easy. It's just so easy to be vegan now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it
no
is.
one
Yeah.
has any excuse.
Yeah, absolutely. But with that, do you have any other questions, George? Or
No, I think that's it. Yeah, thank you, Brian, for
awesome.
having me on, and
Yep.
I look forward to hearing. I guess what will be your first? Is this a podcast episode? Are we calling it or?
Yeah, I think we're gonna do say it's a podcast. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I really look forward to hearing it, and thank you for making me the first guest that you've had on the show. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. So, just for people that might not know where to find you, like where can people find you?
Yeah. So my username is Carnism Debunked on Instagram and on X. And then I run the website carnismdebunked.com, which is for, you know, debunking all the anti-vegan arguments. And yeah, and then I guess you'll be tagging me in the YouTube link or description on this for my YouTube channel. So go help me out and subscribe, please, folks, because I'm not as well subscribed on YouTube as I am followed, you know, on Instagram, for example. So yeah, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'd really appreciate that, because we should all be supporting each other's channels, and obviously subscribe to Brian as well if you haven't done so already, because we want to really dominate that. Yeah, we want vegan advocacy channels to really dominate cyberspace, and YouTube is where I think we're falling behind in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. But with that, George, I just want to say, you know, thanks for everything, and you know, I look forward to seeing your future content.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much, Brian.
All right, thanks, George.